Right, so South Africa's case against Israel at the International Court of Justice just got a massive boost of endorsement. Not just from another country here and another country there, but from an entire bloc of them. In fact, it's the second largest bloc of countries next to the United Nations, the OIC. And given who they are and who their members are, this is huge. The OIC is the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, and as the name says on the tin, this is a bloc of 57 Muslim nations, for the most part majority Muslim nations, in cooperation. But by coming out on the side of South Africa's case, it means that finally they are, as a bloc, taking the historic step not only of coming out on the side of Palestine, sending a powerful message to the ICJ ahead of legal proceedings beginning next week, but that the international Muslim community can be part of this ongoing process themselves to redefine how international law works, ensuring that justice is upheld and that no nation can ever be above the law, as Israel consistently seems to be placed. Right, so the OIC, the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, a group of 57 countries spread across 4 continents and the second largest international organisation next to the United Nations itself, has issued a statement of support for South Africa in a huge blow to Israel. It can't be seen as anything else, as Muslims across the world, via their political leaders and governments, come together in consensus to side with the occupied Palestinian territories and against them and the genocide they are committing. The statement from the OIC reads, OIC welcomes South Africa's International Court of Justice suit against Israel over genocide. The Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, has welcomed the suit filed by the Republic of South Africa at the International Court of Justice for the crime of genocide against the Palestinian people committed by Israel, the occupying power. The OIC has affirmed that the indiscriminate targeting by Israel, the occupying power, of the civilian population and the thousands of Palestinians, mostly women and children, killed, injured, forcibly displaced and denied basic necessities and humanitarian assistance, and the destruction of houses, health, educational and religious institutions in their totality, constitute mass genocide. The OIC called upon the court to respond expeditiously and take urgent measures to stop this mass genocide being perpetrated by the Israeli Defense Forces in the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, this statement is the culmination of a meeting that was held in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia back on October the 18th. So within weeks of Israel's genocide beginning, or the most recent elements of it, should we say. It didn't start on October 7th after all. But clearly going way beyond what could be considered a justifiable response to the events of October 7th, as what Israel were doing. The OIC, whether you've heard of them or not, did not hang about coming together on this. And given their own history, the history of the OIC itself, that's not actually too surprising. By now, I'm sure anyone familiar with the happenings in Israel and Palestine, or at least a great many of you, will be familiar with the al-aqsa mosque, which stands in the old city of Jerusalem and is one of the most precious and religious sites in the Islamic world. Situated as it is in occupied territory, there have been incidents, let's call them, over the years, especially in most recent years, such as in 2021, when Jewish settlers broke into the al-aqsa compound, which is normally off limits to anybody who isn't Muslim, and decided to stand there and read from the Torah. Or the following year, when Israeli Defense Forces fired tear gas at Palestinians inside who they claimed were throwing stones. And just last year as well, a similar incident of the police breaking in to deal with what again was claimed as stone throwing by Palestinians. But it's back in 1967, following the Six-Day War, when Israel seized much Palestinian territory and all that they didn't seize became occupied territory, that the OIC actually came into being. Al-Aqsa actually being the scene at that point of an attempted arson attempt by an Australian evangelist who thought burning the mosque down would hasten the second coming of Jesus. But what it turned out to be was a catalyst for the formation of the OIC. So the organisation itself is in no insignificant way intrinsically linked to the Middle East conflict between Israel and Palestine. And you can understand why they've arrived at such a position, therefore. But that doesn't in any way mitigate how important and how big this move is. 57 countries are members of this bloc. 48 of them have Muslim majorities amongst their population. They have permanent delegations to the United Nations and the European Union. And frankly, it's amazing we don't hear more of them. But I suppose the idea of organised Muslims to Western ears, indoctrinated as so many are by billionaire media barons, is a big and scary thing to think about. It shouldn't be. Now, as we know, in response to South Africa's submission, Israel have accused them of blood libel and anti-Semitism on steroids response, which is absurd, not to mention grossly insulting, when the reason of this submission is written on the corpses of 30,000 dead Palestinians, so many of whom are children, and Israel playing the race card again to get out of that should harden already dim views against them. But we also know that holding Israel to account is really bloody hard, when they seemingly get excused and let off and pandered to by certain nations, certain politicians, time after time. The US in the here and now are the obvious ones that come to mind. Genocide Joe and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The Security Council of the UN constantly trying to pass a ceasefire motion to stop the killing, only to see the US Permanent Council member veto this every single time. And it's just soul-destroying and sickening to witness. But they aren't alone. Back in 2009, an arrest warrant was issued here in the UK for war crimes against the then Israeli Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni by lawyers acting for Palestinian victims of the Gulf War era Operation Cast Lead, when she was due to arrive in the UK on a visit. She cancelled the trip upon hearing she'd be arrested, basically, and so the warrant got cancelled because she never arrived in the country. An attempt to bring a universal arrest warrant against her based on those same war crimes was requested in 2011 via the Crown Prosecution Service, but this got blocked by the then Director of Public Prosecutions. I wonder if anyone might care to hazard a guess who it was at the time. Yep, it was Keir, Zionist without qualification, Starmer. This incident then led to a complete review of how war crimes arrest warrants get issued in the UK, and effectively new laws passed by the then Cameron government saw such things become the preserve of the Attorney General and no longer the courts. Well, it's the courts that uphold the law, isn't it? Both domestic law and international law. It doesn't matter which laws they are, they're upheld by courts here. And here we have the situation now, when it comes to war crimes, that the courts have had that power taken away from them via political interference. And again, it all came about to protect Israel. The Tories won't repeal this, it's their law, and Labour is now led by the guy whose actions ended up instigating this law coming in. So actually, with the influence such a large bloc as the OIC is involving itself in this case, taking a side, standing by Palestine against Israel, no longer need we worry about these national level interferences, because at the World Court all of that is superseded. They have a chance here and now by taking the stand they have to shape how international law is enforced, due process, justice, and finally break this cycle of exceptionalism that Israel seems to be perpetually afforded. To break that gifted impunity that they have, and finally make it face the consequences for its alleged international law violations. It's going to be a shock to their systems, but we need to see it happen if we're to have any faith in a judicial system. That isn't to say they can coerce the ICJ in any way to do that, the OIC, mind you. The ICJ is completely independent. However, their rulings and their conduct in this matter will be scrutinised by the entire world. With the OIC taking a stand alongside South Africa, if it were to choose to go that far beyond this statement of support, get the Arab League involved too even, they can. As leading lawyer Tayyab Ali has written in a recent Middle East Eye article. Ali, incidentally, was one of those lawyers involved in trying to get Tzipi Livni arrested back in 2009. Well, he said, the OIC and the Arab League have the opportunity to be part of a historic process that could redefine the application of international law in conflict resolution and uphold the principles of justice and accountability on the global stage. I'd like to think he's right, because my God, it sorely has to be done, doesn't it? No country can be above international law. Yet for decades that appears to have been the case for Israel. Now, even in the face of mass genocide, too many state actors in bad faith are turning a blind eye to it all, or continuing to overtly support Israel. South Africa has said enough is enough. Other nations from Malaysia to Yemen to Oman to Qatar have said likewise, or are acting in a way that says likewise. And now here are the 57 nation states of the OIC doing so too, as a collective. Israel could, of course, choose to stop itself, but the out-of-control hard-right coalition government of Netanyahu can't afford to. Netanyahu's career depends on it, after all, and nothing is more important to Bibi than Bibi himself is. It seems even assassinations and risking a wider Middle Eastern conflict isn't above him in his pursuit of ongoing atrocity. Though these are, it must be said, still allegations. But by all means, watch this video next on the assassination of a Hamas leader in Lebanon the other day and see if you think it could possibly be anyone else. Because I can't think of anyone. I'm all ears if you've got any ideas. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.